Hey, everybody, welcome back to the Innovation Storyteller Show. We are doing a phenomenal new series in conjunction with for funding and in conjunction with the EU Nordic Council of Ministers and the Nordic countries. We are bringing together some of the most exciting entrepreneurs, innovators, sustainability expert, deep thinkers, all around this intersection of innovation and sustainability with a very unique lens coming from the Nordic countries. I'm talking about Denmark, Norway, Sweden, Finland, folks who are really at the cutting edge of sustainability and bringing unique and brilliant ideas to help us address climate while also innovating all the ways we've typically done things with new perspectives, new products, new technologies, and new processes that we can really begin to apply in our own businesses and in our lives. And that's why I'm so excited to kick off this series called Nordic Visionaries. And my first guest today is Mathias Wikström. And I'm going to be talking to him about a host of issues. So buckle up, tune in, and get ready for a really enlightening conversation. So a little bit about my guest. Mathias Wikström is a Sweden-based renowned sustainability business leader and creative strategist who aims to innovate as well as making the complex communicate, which is my first love. He has founded Daconomy together with Johan Pihi, and spearheaded globally awarded forefront projects in finance, sustainability, and human rights. He received an EMBA with honors from Stockholm School of Economics with a focus on leading innovation and is an Imagine Leader in 2024. Mathias has won several Grand Prix at Cannes Lion and served on many award juries as president for innovation and Eurobest, among many others. He is a high-scoring speaker at industry summits in Europe, in the US, in Asia, and Latin America, as well as with the UN and UNFCCC. And he is the only person I have had on my show who quotes Bruce Lee in his bio, "Knowing is not enough, we must apply. Willing is not enough, we must do." It's like Bruce Lee was the first Yoda, don't you think? We have so much to learn, so much to learn. Mathias, welcome. Welcome to the show. My first guest on Nordic Visionaries. Welcome.
Thank you, Susan, and thank you for the kind introduction. No pressure, of course, being the first visionary. I'm very proud and humbled to kick this off together with you. So very much looking forward.
Well, let's dive into it. Mathias, tell me a little bit about your background. How did you actually come into working into this intersection of innovation and sustainability?
That's a good question. I think it is actually what is the most needed. We need to innovate in order to make sustainability efforts resonate with the many. I was back in the day working together with my co-founder of the economy, Johan Pihl, in brand strategy and advertising. As I had my first child, I decided to try to educate myself better because if I was going to be spending a lot of time away from her, I really wanted to be quite good at what I was doing. So I did my MBA at Stockholm School of Economics and Leading Innovation, and Johan Pihl did the same, but in Berlin, School of Creative Leadership. And when we came out of that process, we understood two things. One, language is important, right? So the academic world taught us how to communicate in a way with the stakeholders that gave us next level of authority, I would say. And the other thing was that we understood that we needed to give up on trying to create communication and rather focus on delivering innovation that communicated in its own right. So that's how it all kicked off. And we did our first project for civil rights defenders in Stockholm, leading human rights organization. And shortly after, we had the opportunity to also work together with Ålandsbanken and their management team based in Åland Islands, Mariehamn, in the middle of the Baltic Sea. And that's where sustainability became front and center of the innovations that we have later worked hard to bring to market.
Mm. Yeah, it feels like there's always been this ethos around sustainability from the Nordics. We, I think in the United States, I can remember an ecological movement from when I was 5 years old. I remember we had a nature play in my first grade. I was 5 or 6 years old. I got to play the lead role of Mother Nature. It was in the middle of the gasoline crisis here in the United States. And it felt like there was a movement that was happening around clean water, clean air. Especially the gas crisis made us think, wow, there's got to be a better way. But this is an ethos I feel like that has been embedded or imbued in Nordic culture for a very long time. Do you have experience, even as a young person, of having a respect and an understanding of climate in a way that's different from ours?
Yeah, I think that might be the case based on the fact that we have direct and availability to nature in a way that is quite different from many other countries around the world. Of course, I can't speak for everyone, but in Sweden you basically can access nature wherever you'd like, as long as you're not intruding on the individual's property in a way that is bad or have impact on their privacy. You can basically access any land in Sweden. And I think we are also quite a large country. We have a lot of nature around the corner. We are blessed with opportunity to be able to teach our children to go skiing and ice skating in the winter and go swimming and sailing in the summer. And over time, I've come to realize that that is a tremendous luxury, actually, to have that opportunity. And it differs very much from other parts of the world. And I think it is something that has shaped, speaking only for myself, but what I recognize also in other innovation-driven companies coming out of the Nordics and looking at how they pilgrimage and progress evolution around sustainability around the world, I think this has colored our experience and what we value. As I grow older, I know coming back from the larger metropolitans of the world, the first thing that strikes me is when I step out of the airplane, which is a paradox in its own right, of course, working with sustainability, but it's the fresh air and the crispness and the first couple of breaths coming back to Sweden is always that of relief kind of thing. That
That's funny. For me as a New Yorker, it's more of a sense of shock. It's more like an assault on my lungs. What do I do with all this pure oxygenation? I'm not exactly sure how to handle it.
No, it's an overload, right? I get that. No, no, but I think, and it's also why it's an ethos around wanting this to be for everyone. We have always grown up in the Nordics saying this is for everyone. It shouldn't be just for the few. The direct access to nature and experience and connecting with nature need to be for the many. And that's also the main rationale, I think, around protecting nature, because it's much easier to protect something that you have access to, that you grow up with and that you learn to appreciate and to benefit from. And I'm not talking about extraction. I'm talking about being in the forest, being on the lake, being on the ocean, being out in the archipelago. I always try to return to the archipelago when I need to blow my mind clean, kind of thing of stress over the last weeks or months of travel. Just spending time in nature brings balance to my soul.
Yeah. So let's talk about a little bit about this intersection between innovation and sustainability. The innovation, I think, for many of us who work in tech, who work in you certainly, Matthias, in design and branding. Tell us about a little bit about first the innovation side. So the Nordics are famous for amazing, amazing innovation and breakthrough in design. I think most of my American colleagues maybe first encountered this right out of college trying to pick up some IKEA furniture, right? We might have started understanding. I think at one point in time I had furnished my entire office with IKEA, my first office, and by the end I was pretty sure I spoke Swedish fluently. I had eaten my weight in Swedish meatballs just going back and forth to IKEA, and every time I left the store it said "Hey do," and I was like,
Yeah.
I now have a phrase I can actually implement. But
Yeah, and I love that. I think IKEA has done a great share of democratizing access to good design for sure. I completely agree with that. I think for us, this design and innovation, you can't have one without the other. We've been trying to drive the market by illustrating the potential and showcasing that Sustainability does not need to make experience trade-offs in regards of design quality and design ambition. It can be equally as sexy or even sexier than products that are not produced with equally as high sustainability ambitions. And I think we've based our innovation work on that notion, but also dividing it into four verticals, looking at technology, communication, business, and purpose, trying to find a sweet spot for that. And for technology side, it always comes down to feasibility, right? So it needs to be there, otherwise it doesn't matter. And the communication side, connecting back to our background, it's all about desirability. So connecting that feasibility to desirability, and then of course protecting the technology that we aim to deliver by connecting a strong business case to it, looking at the viability of what we're trying to do. And at the end of the day, putting this on a platform that stands on a solid integrity out of a purpose reasoning based on sustainability. When those four, feasibility, desirability, viability, and sustainability, when they play together, very little things can stop you, because then you've hit the sweet spot out of an innovation perspective, that not only does it work, not only does it make sense, not only is it profitable, but it doesn't do any harm. Rather the opposite. It contributes to a more sustainable tomorrow. And I think looking at the world today, we can surely all agree that that should be front and center of all business efforts.
That is the ideal, right? I think here, sometimes in the United States, it almost feels like an afterthought rather than part of the planning process. How is that different in your world, Mathias, where sustainability is mandatory, not a nice to have?
I love that. I never heard of it phrased in that way. I think you put it really well, Susan. It's an afterthought, and I think that's where we differ, right? So sustainability need to be a prerequisite, not an afterthought. As an afterthought, you can always decide if you want to have it as an add-on or as a complementary component. To us, sustainability need to be at core. But we must remember that sustainability is not only about doing good, you also need to do the combination, doing well by doing good. And what I mean by that is that we need to see a long-term profitability connected to the innovation around sustainability. Otherwise, those innovations will not be sustainable. And there is, I think, in every vertical being shaped, there is initially a bit of naivete around that, right? So we can see great ideas that may or may not scale, and then they will fall apart if they don't scale. So it's equally as much about a profitability perspective, having sustainability that scales, as it is about a reach and availability perspective, looking at the very notion of climate justice, having everyone on board, having everyone empowered, everyone enabled. We need to transition to a low carbon economy together, right? So collaboration, which is one of the additional pillars I would like to add to our innovations, is always at core, not thinking that you can do everything on your own, but that everything needs to be done together. So partnership and collaboration has always been at the core for the economy, and it is what has enabled us to progress so swiftly, I would say.
Well, I think this is such an interesting cultural difference, because when I think about big American brands, like Meta is move fast and break things, right? Nike is just do it. Coke is it. Or even McDonald's, I'm loving it. I'm not necessarily loving all the implications of climate. In fact, it's not even a consideration, right? It's moving all these other pieces so quickly. It's like there's a sense almost in the United States, we don't have a moment to even stop and breathe, go to a cabin in the summertime and just free your mind. It's almost not part of the ethos to stop for a moment long enough to say, this is so important. And the reason why I think you're so critical as a guest on this show is that it's not like you're operating in a slow moving industry. You are bringing climate and sustainability thinking into financial services, into fast moving transactions, into and incorporating behavioral science. Tell us a little bit more just about economy, and so people can get a sense of how this technology integrates with sustainability in a way that we can understand. Give us some examples of what you and your clients are doing together.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. I'd be happy to. I just a brief comment on the taglines and the positioning around the larger American brands. It's so much about masculinity. It's so much about,
Mm.
oh, I'm the best in class. I can do everything on my own. I'm the lone cowboy. I'm the super cool,
I
you
am the
know.
captain of my soul,
Yeah,
right?
I'm the captain of my soul, and
Mhm.
I'm really strong, and I'm a man, and I can do man things. And I'm so sick and tired of that narrative. It's just complete bullshit, right? So I think when everybody sags in that direction, we sig, and
Mm.
that has made all the difference, and that's where the collaborative effort comes from. And I also believe that if we are to transition in a just and fair way, we need to do that at full capacity, right? So. But that don't get me started on the representation topic because then we'll be here all day. But I
That's
think
true. That's true.
coming back to the economy and what we've succeeded with, I think we have made it easy to educate all users for banks, retail banks, around cause and effect. And sustainability in many ways, also out of a language perspective, connects to finance, right? So sustainability and finance shares many of the same components. What you put in, you get out, and you need to take care of your assets in order for them to grow and so forth.
Oh, that's
Um,
interesting. I don't know that a lot of people make that connection here.
no, maybe not, but I think they should.
Mhm.
It all comes down to balance, right? So you can't take out more than you put in over time, and you need to respect the process to a certain extent, and also respect the governance structures, right? But what we did out of the economy perspective is we developed the opportunity, the first ever spend-based methodology that presented with your payment card purchase, you could see not only the damage done to your wallet out of the local currency perspective, but next to that, on your bill, you could also see the CO2 intensity score for that very purchase, that very transaction.
Wait a minute. So I go to McDonald's, I buy a hamburger, and what shows up on my app is congratulations, you just knocked out 3 acres of rainforest.
Yeah,
Is that what I get?
if that would have been the case, that's the interpretation. What we do is, so we take companies' reported impact data, and what appears on your receipt is your representation of their impact by your spending. So the money you spend with the company, how much of that is represented in their overall environmental impact? Sometimes measured in CO2 emissions equivalents, which is quite distant and quite difficult to relate to many. We see the consequences, of course, already, but we can also do it with freshwater intensity scoring, looking at how much water is this representing, or biodiversity and land use going forward. So I think at the end of the day, it's not about pointing fingers, saying, "Hey, Susan, you had a burger. Look at those trees over there. Now they're dying." That's not the idea. But
I
it's
need
more,
something to make me stop eating burgers. I mean, something has got to stop this, but
yeah.
okay.
No,
Yeah.
but it's more around cause and effect. Saying it's a bit. I think the world has been we've been triggered to believe that consumerism is the solution to everything, right? The more we consume, the better we get, and the more points we get, and the more credit and the more social recognition we get. And kids today run around with big logos on their chests instead of their. When I was growing up, we had our name on our t-shirts. Now we
We
have corporate
did.
names instead. So
Yeah.
I think if you understand cause and effect, you also understand how to steer your consumption patterns and what you want to contribute to and what you don't want to contribute to. So it's all about mindful decisions, really. And at the end of the day, I mean, of course, you're still gonna be consuming, but you can incentivize companies by choosing those of lesser impact that work harder to not have such a bigger environmental impact, or social components, looking at child labor and other data sets that you can add to that knowledge, saying, this is what I would like to know about the companies that I spend my money with. If you don't want to know, then you don't have to. That's fine too. But I think over time, better and better educated consumers will turn into better and better, or better, it's a, I don't mean to put a value in it like that, but it will be more better educated citizens, and better educated citizens, I strongly believe, has the opportunity to shape societies in which, we will see progress, and we will see sustainability not even being relevant anymore because everything is sustainable per se. So that's what we do. We calculate the carbon score per transaction. We have it with water. You can see what impact you've had. You can track and trace and compare. You can educate yourself to reduce it, or you can save and invest to direct your consumption in an even more sustainable direction. So we also work with hyper nudging in regards of helping people achieve a greater sense of financial control or financial well-being, if you may. It's difficult to ask someone to take responsibility for a whole planet if you're very concerned around your personal finances to begin with, right? So that is also one part. And if you combine these two, the E and the S, or the environmental and the social, the me and the we, if you may, we can showcase to the banks that taking care of person and planet leads to profit. And if we do that, we believe that the transition will be faster, because if you can make money on saving the world will be saved in no time.
Yeah, I'm a big believer in selfish altruism.
I love
If
it.
if there's I'm happy to do good for the world, but I also have to know what's in it for me as a motivator to actually go and do it or to keep doing it, right? I might have like a spark of humility and generosity and so, but it's not sustainable if it doesn't keep feeding me. So can you give us some examples, Matthias, of companies that you've worked with that have seen real resonance with this and some results from the work that you've been doing too?
Absolutely. So we launched actually in the US. We launched with, at the time, Bank of the West, also BNP Paribas Bank,
Mm.
and they went live with an opportunity for a niche payment card, which was basically you could sign your own Paris Agreement, and the Paris Agreement is about tracking and measuring and aiming to reduce your impact as a nation, and you could apply that to as an individual to see if you could contribute to the overall ambition. They launched it, and they had the high, it was the most successful launch ever by the bank, to such an extent that after a while they started calling around to the branches saying, guys, you're outperforming our digital channels, and this was a digital first offering.
What was
And
the offering?
a payment card that calculated the carbon emission score and also donated to 1% for the planet.
Mm.
So what happened was that all of the branches that they connected with said the same thing, that yesterday we were competing on basis points on the interest rates. Today, when someone comes in, I can have a conversation around the environment we have and how we can work together to protect it. And that made all the difference. We saw NPS scores going through the roof. We saw retention and recommendation values going through the roof. We see in other cases that we have now further developed that interactions off the back of having these savings or impact measurement capabilities increases with up to 30 interactions per month. We see
Mm.
that savings go through the roof, in average an additional 2000 US more per user in year, which aggregated becomes quite substantial in
Wow.
regards to deposits. And for a bank, that means
Everything.
stability. Yeah, it's the basics of banking, right?
Right.
Get
It's the blood flow, right? It's the blood supply of a bank. Yeah. Your
in
deposit.
and get it out, and get a cut in between. But what it also does, and I think this is probably the most interesting component, it's the data play, because you can assist your clients in a more relevant way. So this is basically turning banks into the handrail for the transition we need to see. The banks are future-proofing themselves by becoming more relevant. Relevance in banking is on going down because basically, Susan, they're giving you an application and then you do all the work. You don't even know any person at the bank anymore. And hey, you're doing everything for them, but they are charging you. It's a brilliant business model.
Brilliant business model.
But with this one, we can educate them around what I call the ghosts of Christmas, right? To go Dickens here for a while. So the past, the present, and the future. You have the past data in regards to your activity scores when choosing your menu preference or mobility preference, how you live, how you would like to fireproof or floodproof your house and so forth. You have the present data manifested through your daily transactions, as you do with your payment card. And that was also important when we developed this. We needed to connect to something you were already doing, not necessarily creating something new, but looking at something that you did and that you cared a lot about. So money was an obvious carrier of this educational effort, turning every payment card into a textbook for change, if you will. And then we have the intent data, the future data, looking at what am I saving for? What am I hoping for? And that's where the banks also can step in and say, hey, how can we help you reach your dreams? How can we help you achieve this? And I think all in all, that turns banking into something of greater relevance in my life than it has today. Today, when I check my account, I'm basically just scared to see how bad is it really. And we need to go from there. We need to go from how bad is it to how can they help me? What can I do?
Yeah. Well, it feels to me, especially with so many changes happening in the world, right? Whether it's politically, economically, from a climate perspective, we can very quickly fall into this kind of state of shock and paralysis where we don't want to do anything. And so creating mechanisms where it's incorporated into our day-to-day lives is perhaps one of the most important mechanisms for creating change is how do I make it as effortless and yet keep me engaged, interested in learning, but also make it as easy for me as possible to be able to contribute positively to change. So I
I could
don't fall into the paralysis.
I couldn't agree more. And that's the greatest threat, right? When we think that there is no hope, when we think that the only thing I can do is stand still or sit down and be afraid. I think in a way we're trying to create the Fitbit for the planet in the sense that you can always follow up and track your progress, because if you can't track your progress, it's very hard to see how am I going to feel good about the efforts that I do, right?
Mm,
So I think that's utterly important, and I think you're onto something that I believe is probably the most important component. Unfortunately, it's missing today, and that is the narrative. What
mm.
narrative am I to believe in on a global level, on a national level, and a local level? What kind of language, what kind of targets are we to set? How are we to collaborate to reach those targets? And how are we to tell the stories that engages and empowers and enables this transition? How are we going to talk to our kids around the fires in California, in Hawaii, the floods in Valencia? We are living in the new normal, but our language so far, I believe, is failing us to some extent.
Yeah.
That's why I believe this is a brilliant initiative, looking at what you're trying to do with the visionaries, because we need voices to lead the way. We need data to substantiate those voices, and we need to get distribution right. Otherwise, the lie will be 6 times around the world before the truth is even getting out of bed.
Oh, yes, absolutely. It's so true. It's unfortunately so accurate. I'm I'm always amazed by this idea that lies travel faster than truth. And
Mhm.
it's because Yuval Harari, I don't know if you know the brilliant thinker who wrote Sapiens and now has a new book out as well, said truth is the most expensive commodity to create. It requires so much research and so much confirmation and effort to create truth. It is so easy to create opinion and lie. And that's why it's so precious and also so hard to come by. So this work that you're doing is trying to harness some levels of truth, right, that we can hold on to. So, you mentioned that this kind of conversation is important because of the storytelling, but tell me about Tell me the story that you needed to tell Bank of the West and others in order to get them on board with this big idea. What was that first meeting like when you're coming to talk to them? What's the story you told them?
I think it's not as much about the story we have been needing to tell, but the people that we have needed to found.
Oh,
Find. And by saying that, I mean that within every organization, there is entrepreneurs, there is people wanting to evolve, to progress, to create value in new ways, to create relevance, to create relationships that are strong. And we were very fortunate to within Bank of the West find a team that was very much on their toes in regards to how can we create greater value for our clients? How can we help them with things that they believe are extremely important? And under the lead of, at the time, Ben Stewart, who was the CMO and head of growth, they made a few bets on this being relevant to their clients, and they were right. It was a success. But
is
think that
there a demographic with that, by the way? Sorry, Matthias. Are they finding that young people are gravitating more toward this, older people? Is there any kind of insight into the demography of who loves this?
absolutely, one would have thought so. I certainly did think so.
Uh-huh.
I thought it was primarily younger people, and out of those, the greater part would be women, right? I was completely wrong. At least if we're looking at the early data that we extracted from Sweden, we saw this in all age groups were
Wow.
were equally as represented to a very large extent, but for different reasons, right? So the younger people, of course, being concerned, and there's a study from University of Bath coming out 3 years ago now saying that half of the kids, 10 countries, 1,000 kids in each country, half of them were reluctant to even have children because of the climate crisis. So coming
Wow.
back to the narrative and bringing hope, right? So they were concerned about around that. The middle-aged, or like the 30 something, they were more concerned out of a parental perspective, saying, I'm having kids, I would like for them to grow up in a world that makes sense out of a sustainability perspective.
Yeah.
The third the third group were the older people, and their reasoning was more around what is it that we're leaving behind? What kind of responsibility can we take for the legacy that we are providing? So different reasons, but equal representation. On the gender side, it was a 49-51 split. So
Wow.
women were more represented, but just with a slim margin. So I was surprised. I definitely thought it would be different, but this also differs between geographies. It also differs between different, we work with over 100 banks in the world today, and obviously that differs between the banks and depending on their positioning and so forth. But
Right.
in general, I think it is a topic of general concern.
It's fascinating. I remember there was a big campaign with teenagers in the United States if don't text and drive.
Yeah.
And kids decided that their phone was so important, they didn't want to learn how to drive anymore. And it was a huge issue for
Wow.
car companies, right? The message was so clear, don't text and drive. And the answer was, okay, I'll text. Mom, can you drive me to football practice? Can you drive me to soccer practice? Because I don't want to
That,
drive. And you see it trending up and kids taking Ubers because God forbid they should put their phone down, right?
yeah, that's amazing. I never heard that one before.
Yeah.
That's very interesting out of a user or a
Right.
user.
Who would have thought the byproduct of a public health campaign, right, would wind up leading to even maybe even further tech addiction. But this intersection, the work that you're doing is also based on the lifestyle calculator, right? That was developed in partnership with UNFCCC. And maybe you can tell us a little bit more about that. That's in 90 countries now. How does your work integrate this lifestyle calculator
Yeah,
component?
so the lifestyle calculator is a self-assessment web-based tool for you to calculate your environmental impact based on your lifestyle choices.
Ooh.
And what is
So
important,
anybody can do this, right?
it's free, it's out there for grabs. Yeah, we did it together with the UNFCCC. Working close to the UN has always been important to us, and also with leading academia. I think it's a way for us to both future-proof what we do, but also help distributing the great knowledge that resides within both within the UN and within academia, and now in later days also within the banks, right? They are extremely knowledgeable about sustainability. And if we could just sprinkle all of this knowledge over a sufficient base of people and make that readily available, then I think we would have a quite interesting development. But the lifestyle calculator is a tool that aims to do just that, to democratize availability to understanding cause and effect. But it is also about comparability. And that's where competitive edge kicks in later in the day. But before that happens, comparability comes down to having data provided that is relevant to all. Trade-off is that you can't be equally as super localized and super granular, but you get comparability between countries, between regions, and so forth. And this is a platform that we provide together with the UN in order to have everyone understand, does it matter what I do? And if it matters what I do, what should I try to do more of? What should I try to do less of? Looking at public transportation, looking at energy mix in regards of heating or cooling for that matter. So it's an interesting tool, and comparability is at core equally as much as it is in a commercial context, because without comparability, it's impossible to compete. And if you can't compete, you can't win. And if you can't win, there is no reward, right? So coming back to what I said earlier, if it was profitable to save the planet would be saved in no time. And that's what we're trying to bring, because our latest research, both in the EU, in the UK, and in the US, shows that people are very concerned with the state of the planet, with the state of the climate crisis. I think most of them just call it risk now because it's so omnipresent. So you don't even have to reference it as the climate crisis. It comes down to risk and different kinds of risks in our lives. And what they see is their political leadership stepping away. So they turn to other entities, to other institutions to help them contribute to solving the problem that they face. Financial services is an amazing aggregation of brilliant platforms to do just that. It's safe, it's regulated, it's fast, and it's been getting better and better and improved more and more over the years, driven by greed, right? So if we can, well, we can paraphrase that, we can say if we can turn that greed into green, then I think we can really say that the banks of the world are at the very core of the transition. If not, even they are the transition, because they finance and fund what will be our tomorrow. And without funding, what's being built for tomorrow is not going to get built. So it's quite easy to follow basic financial analysis, really. Follow the money, and we'll see where we'll end up.
We don't necessarily think about harnessing banking customers to be agents of change in the fight for climate and sustainability. And yet they are probably the greatest conduit, aside from paying your taxes, right? Aside from government being the conduit, right? Financial institutions are probably the greatest point of contact, single point of contact for any citizen in any country.
Absolutely. And if you think of paying your taxes as in paying your insurance, because that's basically what it is, a collective insurance to get educated, to get healthcare, to get roads to travel on, and so forth. And if you look at your role as a banking client to be the enabler of your future, what your tomorrow will look like. But if you aggregate all of that, it's going to be what the future for all will look like. So I think we just need to step out of our role, as we've been defined as consumers for such a long time. It's time we start acting like citizens and looking at what our overall contribution is, I think.
Yeah. And I just love it on your website how you have pictures of people who have said, like, I'm cultivating enough vegetables to sustain my family throughout the year, or I'm really looking at how much water I'm consuming in just my buying habits, or things like that. It is possible to actually take these really big, broad concepts and making them personal. And I frankly think this is something that the Nordics do exceptionally well, because you take this sense of personal responsibility around climate that I think we're still working on here in the US a little bit. Well, Mathias, I'm coming to this time in our conversation where it's time to put you on the hot seat.
Oops.
Ask you a couple of hot seat questions, if you don't mind. So I'm curious, who are the Nordic innovators who have inspired you the most? Authors, designers, environmentalists? Even any books that you would recommend to my audience as well.
I think that there's three people coming back to the narrative component that I think has inspired me a lot. Number one, obviously, being Astrid Lindgren, one of the greatest storytellers of our time, an amazing, the mother of Pippi Longstocking and many other characters, right? Challenging the status quo through her amazing language and always siding with the child. I think she was an amazing children's author. Connecting that to Hans Rosling, obviously substantiating change with data, illustrating what can be done with data, and also challenging a few notions or common beliefs using data. And the third one I had the privilege to grow up with is my dad, who basically, I think, was the combination of the two, or he is the combination, is still around. So he's the combination of the two, but also growing up close to an agricultural perspective. He was a journalist and a reporter for one of the leading agricultural magazines in the Nordics. And that brought around the understanding and language around cause and effect, looking at agriculture and farming, as well as the power of language and the power of narrative and the power of substantiating that with data. But I think out of a more potentially populistic perspective, I think there is so many people doing great things. IKEA doing it out of a democratization perspective, getting good design into every home in the benefit of the many. Of course, there is challenges with a business model like that out of sustainability, but I think Jesper and the team at IKEA is doing a good job in mitigating that. We have also on the food perspective as a bridge to that, looking at IKEA being one of the largest restaurants of the world. We have the Eat Foundation and what Johan Rockström and Gunnil Stordalen and the team are doing with Eat. I think it is amazing looking at how are we to transition the food systems in order to not only protect the future of our planet, but also feed everyone in a way that makes perfect sense, right? Coming back to your comment on the hamburger, I think that is also extremely important. And then I need to mention the ocean, right? Because to me, the ocean is extremely close at heart. And looking at what's going on in many parts of the world, I think the Nordics can really lead the way. And I'm very happy to see that Norway did not progress in regards to deep sea mining, but decided to put that back on the shelf. And I hope not only for now, but for all eternity. Messing up the planet above water does in no way justify that we should mess it up below water as well. And I think we have a great inspiration on that note coming out of Sylvia Earle and Keith Tuffley and many other thought leaders in the ocean space.
I'm still kind of stuck on you saying Pippi Longstocking because I used to, as a redheaded girl in America, I used to braid my hair like Pippi and sing. I learned Pippi Longstocking when I stayed in Germany with my family there, and I can still sing for you the entire Pippi Longstocking song in German. So
Wow.
so a great love of mine as well. What do you think American listeners and American businesses, frankly, and we're so impressed with the work of Bank the West and others that you're working with. What can we learn from Nordic approaches to innovation and sustainability that maybe my listeners are innovation leaders all over the world? What can the Nordics teach us that we're not implementing right now?
I find it hard to, so I have both friends and family in the US, and I find it hard to, it's such a big continent, right? There is so many perspectives and so many smart people. I think what I would like, there's two things I would like for some of the United States to get better at, and that is radical transparency, showing it, saying it like it is, showing it for what it is, because it is a solid ground to build on. It needs to be transparent. Otherwise, you will always have it at the back of your head sooner or later. And the other one is embracing collaboration. There is no need to compete on everything. You should only compete on what matters. If you direct all your efforts to competing on what matters, then you're more likely to succeed than if you're trying to compete on everything. Try to collaborate on ecosystems, on standards, on platforms, And that makes sense. So collaboration and transparency is what I think would increase the competitiveness of many of the US companies that I've had the great privilege to work with so far. Now, that is in many ways contradictory to what we are used to be associating with financial services.
Mm.
Transparency and collaboration is not really the top five. It's more about regulation, security, integrity, and data and privacy and so forth. And that's perfectly fine. I'm just saying that if you want to position yourself in a way that is unique and potentially profitable, you can't be positioning yourself exactly the same as everyone else. And I'd be hard to be asked if everyone took away the branding from the websites of the top five American banks or the top four American banks. I don't think anyone could tell the difference really. So I think that's also the greatest risk that they face, relevance and engagement. Lack of relevance drives engagement down. It's time to future-proof banks in a way where they contribute to solving the greatest challenges that we face and what receives the greatest attention and engagement from me. If they can help me do that, I will surely help them drive profits.
Wow. Yeah. Taking this idea of competition out of everything is certainly a new lens on the problem. Yeah. Where do you think we should be focusing our attention when it comes to climate over the next 5 years?
The energy, I think we should focus on what we are already doing and what is going well. So the last I heard is that in Texas, 30% is now your renewable energy. It's up to 40% cheaper than fossil. And this is in Texas, right? So I think if renewable can be that successful in one of the strongholds of fossil fuels, I mean, what's stopping us in other parts of the world? So I think the energy transition is well on the way. We just need to get better at communicating that. We also need to get better at distributing the abilities to do so. China has invested a lot. They made a serious bet on solar, for example. I think what we have seen, what we have learned with recent events and conflicts, that energy is becoming a concern of national security, and well-distributed renewable energy sources is going to be front and center for any government going forward. So I think that is absolutely one of the things that we need to be bit better at, communicating the relevance and distributing the accessibility. And energy is obviously such a large part of the transition. But the other component that I think is also important is coming back to full capacity, looking at bringing everyone's ability into the mix. We have seen we have seen too little of that. And I think that we need to increase the capabilities of or create new institutions that brings this front and center. We have tremendous opportunities and amazing growth in all of Africa, or not, maybe not all of Africa, but in Africa as a continent is where we see the most of the youngest people of tomorrow. We see amazing numbers in regards of transition and looking at the energy space coming out of China. We see a lot of innovation coming out of many parts of the world. Of course, me being biased, looking at what's happening in the Nordics and the change makers that we have the pleasure and honor to be inspired by and to be running side by side with. I think it all comes down to distributing those innovations in the benefit of the many. And that's why it needs, and I'm coming back to this, it doesn't always have to be profitable, but if it is profitable, it has a greater chance to be rapidly distributed. So I think there is a few companies looking at providing data and internet access for all, which I think is a great instrument in order to educate the many, bring climate justice front and center, having everyone understanding cause and effect, having the financial inclusion acceleration, contributing to that climate justice as vehicle for educating the many, connecting every transaction to a consequence, looking at making every transaction bilingual or trilingual. So it's not only about innovating something that is completely new, but combining both relationships in unorthodox collaboration to create new distribution, new opportunities of what is already in place.
Mm.
I think that's where I see the greatest need, what we need the most. Coming back to your question, it's not really data, because data, we have data, it's going to get more granular over time, it's going to get more rich. I get that. And it's not about tech. We have tech sufficient enough to get us out of the mess we're in, but it is about leadership. And I think also out of the Nordics perspective, I think we can support or provide or step up our game in regards to leadership. The Nordics has never been associated with walking ass first into the future, and I don't think we should be associated with that now either. There is a sustainability leadership opportunity for the Nordics, and I see the commercial entities are definitely on the ball and inspired by them, and see them doing that. And I think out of many other perspectives, the leadership in sustainability could also come from the Nordics. But you know what, Susan? I don't really care as long as it gets there, right?
And amen. That's right. Mathias, thank you so much for being my first guest on Nordic Visionaries. I'm so excited to share your message with the world. Tell us, where can people get in touch with you if they want to learn more about you and what Daconomy is doing and things that might be coming up in your world over the next couple of months?
Yeah, so we are going to be participating in Earth Week in New York in April. Looking very much forward to that, working with the Swedish General Council. Please check out our website at daconomy.com to learn more about what we're doing and the current events that we are running. And we're always trying to do our events inclusive, especially when it comes to other startups in this space that needs a bit of coaching or a friendly advice. If you're one of them trying to get it done, trying to innovate, trying to distribute, and trying to bring solutions to the market, don't hesitate to reach out. It's not, there's no point for us to break new ground and to pave new ways unless we also enable others to follow in our footsteps. So that's part of our responsibility. So don't hesitate, can connect with me on LinkedIn or drop me a line, and I will do my best to come back to you, or someone else on the team will. Sustainability spells collaboration, and we need to walk our talk, right?
Absolutely. Mathias Wikström, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Susan. Thank you very much.